Hey everyone. So, what's the secret ingredient for a stable and truly unified democracy? Today, we're gonna dive into a super important concept power sharing. Seriously, you can think of it as the user's guide for preventing a country from falling apart. There's this idea that sharing power is the same as dividing it, and that ultimately it just weakens a country. But is that really true? That's the big question we're going to tackle today by looking at what actually happened in the real world. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with a tale of two democracies that looked really similar on paper but chose opposite paths. We'll see what went wrong with one choice and what went right with the other. And that'll help us understand exactly why power sharing is so smart and all the different ways you can do it. So, our story begins with two small democratic countries, Belgium and Sri Lanka. Both of them were dealing with a really tough challenge. How do you manage lots of different groups of people living in the same place? But as we'll see, their solutions could not have been more different. At first glance, these countries seem almost identical. Look at this. Both are small, about the size of the Indian state of Haryana, and both were grappling with the exact same problem, a super diverse mix of ethnic communities all trying to live together. Okay, so to really get this, we need to know what ethnic means. It's basically a social group based on a shared culture or background. It's not always about religion or where you were born, it's more about a shared sense of identity and history. Now, here's where things get really interesting in Belgium. If you just look at the country as a whole, the Dutch speakers are the clear majority, right? 59%. But check out the note about the capital city, Brussels. There, the whole thing is flipped. The French speakers are the huge 80% majority. This created, as you can imagine, some major political tension. Sri Lanka's situation was a bit more straightforward, but still tricky. You had a very clear majority, the Sinhala speakers at a massive 74%. And then you had the Tamil speakers as a large minority. The big question was, how is this powerful majority going to treat everyone else? So, first, let's look at the path Sri Lanka took. They chose something called majoritarianism, and honestly, it's a powerful cautionary tale about what happens when you decide not to share power. So, what exactly is majoritarianism? Well, it's the belief that if you're in the majority, you can pretty much rule however you want and just totally ignore what the minority groups need or want. And after Sri Lanka got its independence in 1948, this is the idea their leaders ran with. And they weren't subtle about it at all. In 1956, they passed an act making Sinhala the only official language, completely sidelining Tamil. Then, the government started rolling out policies that favored Sinhalese people for government jobs and university spots. And to top it all off, the constitution itself was changed to say the state would protect Buddhism, the majority's religion. The result was, well, predictable and pretty tragic. The Sri Lankan Tamils felt completely left out, like they weren't even citizens. They were being actively discriminated against, denied equal rights, and this created a massive gap of distrust between the two communities, which eventually led to calls for their own independent state. This distrust just kept getting worse until it exploded into a full blown civil war, a terrible violent conflict within the country that caused so much suffering. Thousands and thousands of deaths. And it set the country's development back for decades. A truly awful outcome. So, that was the tragic result of not sharing power. But what happens when leaders choose a different path? Let's flip back to Belgium to see a completely different story unfold. Faced with a similar problem, they chose the path of accommodation. Instead of ignoring their differences or letting one group dominate, the Belgians embraced them. They knew that to keep the country together, they had to respect everyone. And get this, they actually changed their constitution 4 times to find a solution that worked for everybody. That's real commitment. And their solution was just incredibly clever. They tackled every single problem head on. First, to make sure no one group could dominate, they said the central government had to have an equal number of Dutch and French speaking ministers. Second, they gave a lot of power to the state governments. Third, they solved that tricky Brussels problem by giving it its own separate government with equal representation. And finally, and this was brilliant, they created something called a community government to handle things like culture and education for each language group. And the result? It speaks for itself. Belgium completely avoided the kind of horrible civil war that tore Sri Lanka apart. The country stayed united. In fact, their model of cooperation was so successful that Brussels was chosen to be the headquarters for the entire European Union. A huge thumbs up for their ability to manage diversity. So, this tale of two countries gives us our big takeaway. It really answers that question of why power sharing isn't just some nice idea, but something that is absolutely essential for a healthy democracy. And there are really two sets of reasons for it. First, you've got the prudential reasons. These are the smart, practical ones. Power sharing reduces conflict and keeps things stable. Because, as Sri Lanka showed, trying to dominate everyone just blows up in your face eventually. Then you have the moral reasons, which is that it's just the right thing to do. Democracy means people have a right to be heard. And just to be super clear on that word, prudential, it just means making a smart strategic choice based on weighing the pros and cons. And power sharing is definitely a prudential choice because it helps you avoid the massive loss that comes from your country tearing itself apart. And this quote just perfectly sums up the moral argument. A democratic government isn't really legitimate unless the people it governs feel like they have a real stake in the system. Sharing power is exactly how you give them that stake. It's what makes democracy, well, democracy. Okay, so we've established that power sharing is a really good idea. But how do countries actually do it? Let's look at the different forms it can take. Think of this as the essential toolkit for building any modern democracy. First up, you have horizontal power sharing. This is when power is divided between different branches of government that are all on the same level, like the legislature that makes the laws, the executive that carries them out, and the judiciary that interprets them. This creates that awesome system of checks and balances, so no one part gets too powerful. Second, there's vertical distribution, which you might also know as federalism. This is where power is shared between different levels of government. So, you have a national or central government, then state or regional governments, and then local governments, and each has its own sphere of authority. Third, you can share power among different social groups like religious or language communities, and we've already seen a perfect real world example of this, that community government in Belgium. It's a fantastic way to give different groups a say over the issues that matter most to them. And finally, power gets shared among political parties and all sorts of other groups. Think about it. When no single party wins an election, they have to form a coalition government, forcing rivals to work together. And you also have interest groups like business associations or workers' unions that influence government decisions. That's a form of power sharing too. And that brings us to our final question, and it's a really important one. After seeing this whole toolkit and after seeing the huge difference between Sri Lanka and Belgium, if it was up to you, If you were designing a government for a diverse country, how would you do it? Which of these forms would you focus on to build a nation that's both united and truly democratic? It's a huge question, and one every single citizen should be thinking about.